I'm Arjun, and I'm from the Server Cluster or WATcloud division. And today we'll be talking about infrastructure as code, IAC. Uh, so yeah, follow along. If you have just open up a terminal, and you can, if you have pip and Python installed, just run python -m pip install -- user Ansible. And if you want greater instructions, if you have problems with that, there's the docs. I guess I can send the links to the slideshow if needed later on. You can just clone that repo if you want. That's probably the best way to do it. So what is infrastructure as code? So basically, infrastructure as code is a way to easily configure new machines. And we do this by listing all the configurations we want as code, so as actual text and files. And Ansible is the tool that we use most commonly currently on the server cluster division to do this infrastructure as code, although we're also experimenting with other tools as well. So basically, it's pretty simple. Like if you ever bought a new laptop, you've probably already done this. There's usually like a whole flow from Windows, like what's your user name, what's your password, link to your Microsoft account. We're gonna send you a bunch of ads, basically, all that good stuff. So we basically automate that using infrastructure as code, and also a lot more as well, downloading various packages. For example, when you get a new Windows laptop, probably already comes with Windows, with Microsoft Word, or at least Notepad. So those kind of things, but for actual like development setup, like so things like Docker. Okay, so question is, why use infrastructure as code? Why not do everything manually? So benefits of infrastructure as code is reduced manual effort. So basically, I mean, making configuration is not really that much fun, and takes a lot of effort. And if we spend a lot of effort on just configuration, things like that, that takes away that takes away our focus from other more critical things that take us. Sorry about that. That take us closer to our goal of making, really good self-driving car. It's also reproducible, so each time you run it, it's basically the same. Not the same with humans. We make a lot of mistakes, mistype things, do things different ways depending on what Stack Overflow post we read that day. So those are all the benefits of infrastructure as code. So for example, like we could manually configure it. So for example, let's say we need to make a file called helloworld.txt, like in this GIF, and we need the words hello world in that file. So we could run this manually in the bash terminal, and like it works. Like if you see that file, it now has hello world in it. But it's not ideal because, first of all, probably more mistakes. Like, if you want to put it into a file called hello world, oh no, I've put in a file called hello Mars instead. So that's probably going to result in some. That might result in some strange errors that we face in the future after configuration, after setup, and again, that takes away effort. We have to figure out what's wrong, or at the very least fix it. And it's also slower. If you have to do this on on all of our virtual machines for 100 different files, not really very fun to do it manually. So if you can imagine, these are currently like all of the users that we have on our server cluster, and a lot of different configuration have to be done for that. Imagine configuring all these users manually on each of our machines. Would not be fun, take a long time, prone to a lot of errors. So that's why we automate. That's why we. Yeah. Anyone have a question? Okay. So that's why we automate a lot of this using infrastructure as code. And another example is, configuring NVIDIA GPUs, getting the NVIDIA drivers, setting up NVIDIA Docker. It can be complicated. Lots of different little things to remember, and to do it in a reproducible way across many different machines, across different time periods. Not ideal to do it manually. And there's more. This is just a small screenshot. So the question is, how do you use Ansible? And so this is like our live coding session. So when you open up your terminal, if you want to follow along, hopefully you've been able to download Ansible so far. So basically, hi, any questions? No? All good? Okay, sounds good. So the core, and we'll be going over Ansible, which is one of the different tools you can use. There's a lot of tools. So at the core of infrastructure as code, especially with Ansible, is this thing called the Ansible playbook. And it's just a .yml file, and it basically tells Ansible what to do and where. Yeah, so just a YML, so a file, and it's got some, syntax as well. You have to start with these 3 hyphens as an example, and then you have a list of different items, and there's a name which is like a label for like the playbook, and then the host tells Ansible where to run these playbooks. For example, right now localhost, so we're just going to run this playbook on my own computer. However, we might want to also run this on different virtual machines, Delta Ubuntu 1, and we would configure those in a different way as well. So you could run this on multiple different hosts rather than just one host. And then there's tasks, so these are the things that you actually want the Ansible playbook to do. And again, the name's like a label. Become just tells it, you can basically use superuser, you can use sudo, or you can basically use the permissions of the main user to do it if you need to. And then this is the command. So in this case, we're using the copy command. Future cases, we're using the apt, which is like the package manager. So like we should downloading different things. And content and destination. So this is just relevant to this specific command. So for example, I do have a hello world.txt, but I can just remove it for now. And then if I run this playbook, and you can follow along as well if you want to. Okay, as you can see, it's now running the Ansible playbook. So that's the name of the Ansible play, where it's running it basically. And then it's running our tasks. So we could have multiple tasks on here. Currently just ran this, and as you can see, it wrote to this file. Again, there's a file. And so that's just like the hello world of Ansible. So it's a very basic command. Of course, you can see even this could be quite powerful because it doesn't have to have hello world in it. It could have actual important stuff. You could download this on multiple hosts or write this to multiple hosts at once. Yeah, so that's what an Ansible playbook is, and so yeah, there's just the basic command for running the Ansible playbook. As you can see, even in the screenshot, I had trouble with my password. And when you run the Ansible playbook, it executes the task you gave it, and it does cool stuff. So a more complex example is, for example, let's say I've been not getting enough work done because of this great game I found in the apt library. So we want to improve developer productivity. So we want to get rid of this game from all of our servers. Well, it's actually the highest score I've gotten so far. Okay, not that high. So we could do it manually, go on all the different computers and remove it manually, or we could use an Ansible playbook. So again, host, just this computer, but you could run this on many different hosts. And this time we're using the apt command, which is if you've ever used, it's basically for installing and removing packages from a machine, and then the name of and of course each of these tasks has a different syntax which you can find online. This is just an example. And state absent tells it to remove, tells it to make sure that nsnake is not present on that machine. For example, I still have nsnake, but now I can run uninstall package.yml, that playbook. Okay. And so, no more snake. Now my productivity is going to go up a lot. So yeah, that's just a more realistic example of the different stuff you can do. And later on we'll dive into how we use this on actual the server cluster division. How we use we'll go over a couple example playbooks. And again, let's say we went too far and morale is now low. So we could again go manually, or we can use this different playbook. And this one, instead of removing the package, it installs it. It makes sure that the package is there. There we go. And now you have nsnake again. And again, this may seem trivial, but it can be quite powerful when you're doing this with commands that are more important than snake. So yeah, let me know. Anyone have any questions or any problems so far?
So does that only, like, when you're trying to install those packages, is that only for your user on every single host, or is it just for every user?
So it really depends on the playbook. I guess it's for really any, you can do it for any user. It just depends on how you set it up.
Oh, okay.
I believe the way I've done it is for any user.
Oh, I see.
Steven or Ben, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Any other questions?
To supply Arjun's answer, in his example, the playbook is using the package manager, and the APT, the package manager, will install packages for all users.
Oh.
Not simply the super user permission, because it gives you permission to make a change in, like, say, /user/bin to install those binaries. But yeah, like, that's what the package manager does. And when your rule uses the package manager, it does it for all users.
Yeah, and that's the APT. It's the package manager I'm using for this.
And also, if you're running, if you're running Arjun's demo, be sure to change your destination, because Ansible does not, by default, create parent directories for you. So
yeah,
/Arjun may not exist on your system.
Yeah, I was giving a dry run to my brother yesterday. Yeah, and he was stuck on that for a while. So let's move on to the next benefit of Ansible. So the good thing with Ansible is you can use version control. So version control makes it easy to trace our mistakes. So for example, Git, we can use Git version control. And yeah, like for example, after this term, I was trying to install Debian Linux on my machine. Didn't go well, and I basically black screened it. Couldn't figure out why, and sadly, I couldn't go back to my old configurations. I couldn't just run my Ansible playbook again because I'd done it all manually. So, and the good thing with having version control configurations is you can look at your version history. So here I have a version history that I pushed to the repo, and I can always go back to different versions. For example, if I make some sort of a mistake and I can't figure out why this won't run, I can always go back to a different version, or I can use that version information to trace what the mistake is. Of course, it's more useful in more complex commands than this. So for example, let's say I have I pushed a more recent version, and let's say, I Snake is not really doing it for our team, and we need more morale. So replace that game with a different one, and I can just pull that through version history, and I can go back to Snake anytime I want as well. And of course, more useful situations you can use this. Now we have Moon Buggy. Oh, very slow. Yep. Ooh. I always lose it right away when I play this, but not this time. Yep, still this time. And my score is very low. And again, you know, Ansible is very powerful. You can just run different playbooks anytime you want. There we go. And no more Moon Buggy. Yeah, and let's say, you know, I can always go back to an old commit, or I can use that. So I can look at the diff. That's a difference. Oh, change the game here. All the wonderful powers of version control. Back to Snake. Yeah, so that again goes with all the different strengths of using infrastructure as code as opposed to manual configuration and manual tools like that. Just more reproducible, and you have this beautiful version controlled history, which you can use to trace different bugs, go back to old versions if you really need to. Things like that. Very useful on production systems. So now let's go over how does WATonomous use Ansible. So we have an entire repo. You can get this link in the repository or just from the slideshow. And of course, we do a lot more with it. A lot of different stuff. And I'll go over a couple different things. So for example, let's go to different. So this is the actual repository. So if you look at this command, so you can probably see that a lot of similarities between what we're using in production right now and what we've got here. So again, we know using apt to in this case to make sure that these packages are not present. So you know, in this case it's Docker, Docker engine, Docker.io. In our case, it was Snake. And again, you know, in this case, we're making sure that Docker CE, Docker CE CLI are present. In this case, we're making sure that Snake is present. And of course, lots of different options that you can that you can use that are found in the documentation, or you can of course ask us in the Discord if you're ever using Ansible. So that's one of the examples. Another example was the NVIDIA again. Of course, a lot of different stuff here, different tasks now. Instead of just the apt task or the apt keyword, we've got, you know, get URL, a lot of different things. And again, you know, we're getting NVIDIA Docker 2. So very similar concepts. We also have, we can create users. I believe that's hashed, hopefully. I forgot to remove that. So yeah, we can look at. And of course, that's the giant list of users we had. Instead of doing this manually for each user, we can, you know, run the playbook or run one command and run a bunch of different Ansible playbooks and make all these different users. And of course, not just installing commands, making users, a lot of different stuff we use it for. And you can do even more with it than what we use. So setting up, API keys if you need, passwords, just secrets in general. Setting up networks, dismounts, cron jobs. For example, we have one with Docker. And this is for, so when you make, this is a pruner for our Docker, and it basically makes sure that we don't have a bunch of just Docker containers laying around all the time, trying to, and just Docker resources, trying to help with our file system problems that we've having in the past. So it takes this script right here, Docker system prune, and I believe that's, yeah, so it's copied right here onto a bunch of the different machines. And then this sets up a cron job. So basically telling the computer to run this at a certain time on a schedule. So another one of the things you can do with Ansible and infrastructure as code. And also, why just configuration? You can also deploy applications with infrastructure as code, such as using Kubernetes. Kubernetes, you can spin up Docker containers, do a lot of cool stuff with Docker containers. And like if you look at Docker, you can just manually make Docker containers, or you can use Docker compose files. And then with Kubernetes, you can do even more powerful stuff. Yeah. So any questions so far?
So because Ansible needs to have some access privilege in all the VMs that we provision, where do we keep track of the secrets and access tokens for those users?
Where do we keep track of secrets and tokens for those users? Good question. Secrets.yml. Oh, I'm not sure if I should show this stuff. I think it's probably hatched, right? I hope so. Let me think about that.
Okay, so just to clarify the question, like in order to do all of these observations on the VM, somehow Ansible needs to be allowed to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So imagine that you are the system admin, and obviously you need a user on every machine to so that you can use SSH, for example.
That's like a chicken and an egg problem, right? Like.
Yes.
So this is why when we create VMs, we actually do need to manually create one user. And that's also why Ben has saved up a template in our cluster so that we can clone the template to create a VM every time. And that template will include one common WATonomous user that Ansible has access to.
So there is like some manual setup. You can't avoid like all manual.
Unfortunately, yeah, at least one user.
And that user has all.
Yes, it's an admin user, yes.
Okay, so yeah, so there is some manual stuff that you still have to do, like Steven said. So some, you have to create at least one user, and then you can run all these playbooks and stuff like that. Or like we use templates. And I think with Kubernetes, you can. That's another level of abstraction on top of this, where you can just spin up machines through files, like coded up files, and so that would be, another level higher up, where you probably would need to do even less manual work than you need to do with Ansible to set up all these machines.
Wait, but Arjun, those Kubernetes nodes need to live on actual machines themselves, right? So you don't need to create them in the first place.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so probably for a different use case than us.
Yeah, that's a different use case. You have tons of microservices, like with web stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, like I know at my current co-op, I believe we use Google Cloud Engine or something like that, and Google on the back end uses Kubernetes to spin up a bunch of dev VMs and things like that, using new configurations that we changed to the Google Cloud platform in an automatic end. Yeah, they use the Google Kubernetes engine to spin up a bunch of those things.
That is only because you have access to Google Cloud Platform's console, right? Those ones have the ability to create total VMs. For us, because we don't have that interface, or rather that interface is Proxmox. So there's really no need for us like to have the like an API to create a VM quickly. Although I believe Proxmox does provide it, we just don't really use it because we don't create VMs all that frequently.
That's a lot. That's a lot of automation, probably more than we need.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a slightly naive question.
Yeah, go ahead. I can answer those very well, I hope.
So when we use the Ansible stuff on the VMs, each VM I believe is for each user in that VM, we're running the entire Ansible config, and it's just setting up the machine for each user, right? So it's not, the Ansible config isn't setting up the entire machine. It's, for each user, it's setting up the machine for that one user.
I believe so. It does a lot of stuff that's user independent, or I guess instead of user independent, based on like the root user or the super user, which sets up a lot of things for each of the separate individual users. So it would set up stuff that's independent of users, such as installing a lot of these packages and drivers. For example, NVIDIA Docker or NVIDIA, getting all these APT keys. It would do this independent of the users, and then it would set up all these different users after that, or independent of that.
Oh, okay. So the Ansible config basically setups the machine as a whole, and then you can just have multiple users on that one machine.
Yeah, if you think about it in a way, it's basically like someone else. Like you can think of it as a person reading a script and SSH and using SSH to go into the machine and do this. So it can do a lot of the same stuff that we do ourselves, just in a well-defined way and an automated way.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Let's apply to Arjun's answer again. Each user provisioning step or package installation, those are discrete actions. So we can tell Ansible what actions to perform, such as creating a user with all the arguments, such as where the home directory is, what shell do they use as the default shell, and what SSH public keys they would like to use, etc. So those are actions that we implement for specific roles. And what we can do is that we can have a sea of hosts. Some are considered bare metal because they run Proxmox only. Some are VMs created for development purposes. So we assign roles to these hosts, and hosts have associated actions with them.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Great question. Anyone else?
Anyone else here?
Yeah, there's.
Have you guys?
Yeah, go ahead.
You guys, how would I phrase this? Is there ways that I could use Ansible in my daily life on a Linux machine to make my life a lot easier?
So I guess this probably goes back to my conversation with Steven about Kubernetes a little bit. You can definitely use Ansible on your local machine if you want to. For example, I used it to install and uninstall those games, and create files. So if there's such a task that you need to, actually I can think of a lot of different use cases where you could use this. You can definitely use it on your own local machine very easily. But when you use it with a lot of different machines, it becomes even more powerful and even more useful. So yeah, I don't know what an example could be. For example, if you need to, I don't know, have you heard of like hackers usually have like a USB that, if someone's about to catch them, they plug their USB in and delete all their stuff. If you really wanted to, you could probably make a Ansible playbook that does that. And you can just have a simple cron job that checks if that USB there and if that playbook is there. And if you plug in that USB, you could have your playbook delete all your state secrets or all of your stuff. Yeah, so you can definitely use playbook in your own life.
Arjun, in that specific scenario, if you really got a hacker coming after you, I'm pretty sure you want to boot into a DBAN. Yeah, you want to use a separate software that specializes in wiping out hard drives and SSDs. It's not a matter of using an OS process that quote unquote deletes your stuff. That doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, if you're lazy, no, I guess if you just want to delete a bunch of files, then if your significant other wants to use your computer, I guess.
All right, I guess I have to buy a USB stick then.
Yep, and learn how to use Ansible. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming to this Tech Talk, and I hope you learned something.